during the Roman times, I mean, people were crucified by thousands, hundreds of thousands. The Roman didn't leave us any records how they crucified people. Every small period that happened to somebody's life are recorded in the bones. It's like having a huge recording machine inside your body. These are the bones. They record every event in your personal life. In a sense, what we are doing, we are interviewing those people who were living thousands of years ago, and they are telling us what really happened in those days. A Roman historian and politician describe crucifixion as the most cruel death ever invented by human. If you go to the religious art, sure enough, you have millions of images drawn during the centuries of Jesus on the cross. Those images start to appear just at the beginning of the 6th century. At 350 AD, crucifixion was abolished, from the Roman Empire. They had no idea whatsoever how crucifixion looked like. I mean, it is basically totally imaginative. Now, for us as biohistorians, it is important to find how Jesus was crucified. Most studies on crucifixion were based on the Shroud of Turin. Now we know for carbon dating, that it's a forgery. It's not real. It was made during the 12th or the 13th century AD, and has nothing to do with Jesus' body or whatever. Luckily enough, in 1968, right after the 6 Days War, Jerusalem was recaptured by the Israeli. Israeli archaeologists start excavating all around the old city, basically, and it was a big one Jewish cemetery. In one of these caves, we found the first evidence for crucifixion. The name of the deceased was engraved, on the wall of the archery. So we know that he was called Yochanan ben Ha'akul. This is quite an astonishing find, not just because this is the best evidence that we had globally for crucifixion. This specific burial site were dated to the Second Temple period, more or less to the time of Jesus, and was found in Jerusalem. So in time and space, this is the closest you can get to Jesus. What was in the archery was a heel bone. You see, this is the femur, this is the tibia, and here you see the bones of the foot over here. This is the heel bone here at the back over here, what we call it the calcaneus over here. And we found the bone with one single heel bone, like this one, with the nail running into it. What you would expect is that on the cross, actually one foot is lying on top of the other this way. So if we have here the left foot, we'd expect the right foot to be here this way on top of it, and the nail should pass through the metatarsal between the second and the third metatarsal, running through here between the bone, running through the first one and then through the second foot and into the wood. But this was not the case. I mean, we didn't find any metatarsal bone with heel bone with a nail, but rather we found the heel bone. I mean, it was a big surprise. What we noticed is that the nail was running through the heel bone, coming from the lateral side. When the ossuary was first opened, and all the bones were taken out, this is one of the artifacts that came out of the ossuary. And what you see here is the heel bone and a nail that is actually crossing the heel bone. And it was quite a big surprise for us, because if we go back to the Christian tradition of crucifixion, those foot are hold to the post this way. So you see here, I have one foot and then I have the other one on top of the other, and actually those two the right and the left would hold together, but by a nail that came from here, okay, and ran through those what we call metatarsal bone, penetrates through the right one and then through the left one and into the post. Now we see a totally different thing. So what you see here actually, that the nail is coming from the side, from what we call the lateral aspect of the heel, okay, goes through the heel, okay, and comes out through this concavity, so the medial side of the heel bone from here. It was a big surprise. You wouldn't expect to find the nail in this part of the foot.
This is a Roman period nail. This is exactly the kind of nail that one would find for execution by crucifixion. And that's what makes them so interesting, is you can see just how big they are and how ill-formed they are and how non-exacting they are and how terribly, terribly devastating it would be to have one of these in your arm or your neck.
Now, the second important thing about this nail, you see this is the head of the nail and this is the tip of the nail, that you can easily see that the nail is very short. It's only roughly between 11 to 12 centimeters. Now, if you take two heel bones, put them together, and you have to add the skin and the fat tissue and the muscle and everything, you will immediately realize, okay, that the nail, okay, is actually too short to hold both foot together. It's impossible. So it tells you indirectly that each leg or each foot was hammered separately to the cross. In what way, it's another issue. Now, the third issue, which is not less important, is the shape of the tip of the nail. You can see that the tip of the nail is curving fully backward, 180 degrees, just simply curving fully backward. And it's interesting because it tells us how people were crucified. We know that people were crucified while the cross was still on the ground, and the Roman soldier, whoever was it, was hammering the nail through the foot, and it went through the wood, and then it reached the hard surface, the rock, and then it started bending backward. So it tells you something about crucifixion.
Some have proposed the crosses were X-shaped. Peter, for example, according to church tradition, was crucified upside down on an X-shaped cross. We actually have some artwork that goes back to antiquity suggesting X-shaped crosses.
You probably know better than me, there are more than 33 different types of crosses. One of them is the Jehovah's Witnesses were against the typical cross. They said that the T-shaped cross, it's a pagan symbols, and there was no way that Jesus was crucified to a T-shaped cross. Instead, that he just preferred what you call a vertical post with the hands over the head this way. There is no way that you can hold the body this way to a vertical post. Let me show you this drawing. Okay, look at this drawing. This drawing was made by another Israeli anthropologist long ago in 1978 by the name of Josias. And he thought at that time that they were using ropes because they, at that time they didn't have evidence for nails through the palm of the hand. But look at the position of the crucifiers. Now, I advise you all to make a very simple experiment, anatomical experiment. Take just a thick slab of wood and try to put your hand, behind it. You will see that even if you're not trained to be in the Olympic Games, there is no way that normal people can do it. Anatomically, it's impossible. Your shoulder girdle is not flexible enough to embrace the crossbeam this way. First of all, we have evidence that the nail went through the palm of the hand, and they were used nails and not ropes and nothing for them. Not this way, okay, not through the palm of the hand, but what we call through the dorsal aspect. They went through here. So probably his face was down to the ground. People were holding him. He was struggling, trying to escape, and this was the only way to hammer someone.
In one case, Very likely it was Antigonus, the last Hasmonean ruler. One nail actually had been driven through this part of his hand and was bent over.
In the early mid-20th century, physicians start making experiments on crucifixion. They figure out very quickly that if you use the T-shaped cross without any support for the body, people will lose conscious very quickly, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and they lose conscious, and soon after they will die because you find it very, very difficult to breathe. So if you lose conscious after 20 or 25 minutes, so what's the point?
Antigonus, we're told in one source, was beheaded, that's Josephus, and in a later source, a Roman historian says he was crucified. There's a slash mark from an axe across his lower jaw that goes across his neck. So probably crucified, he passes out, he's unconscious, the body's taken down, and then his head is taken from his body.
So what the heel bone tell us that the cross was probably of an X-shaped cross and not a T-shaped cross. I think this is the most important things about this heel bone.
I am hesitant to argue that Jesus' cross was shaped that way for two reasons. The first reason is every single depiction we have of the cross relating to Jesus is either the traditional cross shape like this or more of a T or tau shape, the letter tau from Greek. We see this in manuscripts that date to about the end of the 2nd century, where the word stauros in Greek, which means cross, there is a compendium created that features a cross by combining the tau and creating what looks like a crucified Jesus, and that's the word stauros, or cross. So that's significant evidence that it was understood this way or this way. I'm inclined to think that his feet were nailed to a vertical pole, much as Yehohanan would have been, and that his arms would have been outstretched on a cross beam, a patibulum, which is what he would have carried.
Or alternatively, you can think of a different type of cross.
For me, the clincher that Jesus was not executed on an X-shaped cross, because that would have been perfect. An X shape, of course, is the Greek letter chi, the first letter in Christos, Christ. I can't see how early Christians would have avoided that sign. That would have been perfect. In fact, you know, the chi rho siglum becomes popular later. If Jesus had been crucified on a X-shaped cross, Christians would have run with that. That would have become the traditional sign if that had been the shape.
If I take the other evidence that I have now from the heel bone, from the palm of the hand, and I put everything together, reaching the conclusion, it's my own conclusion, that the cross was an X-shaped cross.
We're in Akaldama, or Akaldama, field of blood, as the locals call it. The tomb that right now we're standing above was discovered quite by accident in the year 2000. The most interesting discovery was somebody whose bones had not been gathered up and placed in an ossuary according to the Jewish custom. We're going to go down in the tomb and we're going to see this. I'll talk more about it, about somebody whose bones were not gathered up, whose body was left in the niche and remained untouched for 2,000 years. We are in a typical first century Jewish tomb. When a person first died, they were not placed in a small niche like this one. Rather, they would be placed in niches like these, which you can tell are much deeper, much longer. The whole body was laid out. Now, after 1 year, family would come in for a second funeral. By this point, the body is nothing more than skeletal material. They would gather the bones, place them in an ossuary, perhaps write the name of the deceased on the ossuary. Then the ossuary would be placed in another niche, or perhaps the same one. After 1 year of death, the bones are gathered up. And you might think, well, wait a minute, How do you know the flesh would be gone after 1 year? This is limestone. And lime, as anyone knows, limestone desiccates biological material very quickly. However, when Shimon Gibson came down into this particular tomb, he found one of these doors still in place in this niche. So they carefully removed it, and they were astonished by what they found. Inside was a cadaver, a skeletal cadaver still wrapped in a shroud. And then to their surprise, when they removed the shroud, they found scalp, a large portion of scalp on the top of the head. The shroud was a bit attached to it. They removed the scalp with hair and sent it to a lab for biological analysis. Then they were even more surprised. The person had died from Hansen's disease, or what is known as leprosy. Now, why is that significant? There have been some skeptics who have maintained that there was no leprosy here in the Middle East, in Israel included, in the time of Jesus. But now we have medical evidence that in the time of Jesus, people indeed did suffer from leprosy. That also explains then why this individual who was placed in this niche was not gathered up 1 year later, and then because the oxygen disappeared, the body did not completely decompose, leaving behind some of the scalp, which made examination of the tissue possible.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are ancient Jewish manuscripts discovered in an area called Qumran. And Qumran is located on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. When the first Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered by the late 40s and the early 50s, the expectation was very obvious that the Dead Sea Scrolls will mention Jesus, or John the Baptist, or Paul. Most of the Dead Sea Scrolls were written before the beginning of Christianity, before John the Baptist, before Jesus, before Paul. So therefore, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there is no mention of these characters. People used to ask me, do they have any relevance for the Christianity? I say, John the Baptist and Jesus didn't know that they were Christians. They were Jews. They were born as Jews, they live as Jews, they preach as Jews, and they died as Jews. So therefore, what is relevant for Jews in Second Temple times is also relevant for John the Baptist and Jesus. My responsibility is to preserve the physical objects. The Shrine of the Book as a building was built specifically for the physical conservation of the scrolls. This is not just a museum that was adopted for the exhibition of scrolls. This marvelous building, dedicated in April 2065, built by Armand Bartos and Frey Kissler, is a unique building, built specifically for the first 7 mythological Dead Sea Scrolls discovered by Bedouins in Cave 1 in 47. So in order to preserve the scrolls, many things were done. We changed the whole system of lighting at the main hall. We used the newest technology of LEDs, that is a cool lighting, because on one side, people, they need light to read from the scrolls. On the other side, light is the greatest enemy of ancient manuscript. The showcases today on display are not the original ones. They were designed and produced by a company in Milano that, after having produced the showcases for the Dead Sea Scrolls, the same company was chosen for producing the new showcase of the Mona Lisa at the Louvre. Because if they know how to show the scrolls, they're good also for the Mona Lisa. In this sense, on one side, people who have the chance to look at the real scroll, but the other side, all the other sections, once on exhibit, they are preserved for the rest of the year, resting for the whole year.
Right behind me are the cliffs where the Dead Sea Scroll caves, most of them were found Also, I'm standing on a plateau, and off to my left are the ruins of where we believe the Essene headquarters used to be located. The Essenes was a party of about 4,000 or so, maybe a few more, according to Josephus and other early historians and sources. Now, to understand this group, the Essenes, and their whole rationale, you need to look at Serik. That means rule. And so it's 1QS, or that is Qumran Cave 1 Serik, the Serik scroll. And there are fragments of it found in caves 4 and 5 as well. I want to draw your attention to column 8, which is really interesting because there it quotes Isaiah 40, verse 3. This is the same passage in the Gospels that is linked to John the Baptist. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. And I think that's really interesting. And so they took it in a literal sense, not of we hear a voice out in the wilderness, but we're going to go in the wilderness and prepare the way of the Lord. And we think that's why they're here. And here's a text we find here talking about being in the wilderness, doing what to prepare for the way of the Lord? Studying the laws of Moses and getting it right. Now, in column 8, they cite Isaiah 40, verse 3, and they call themselves the men or the members of the way. And if that rings a bell, if you think, wait a minute, where have I heard that? That's right. In the book of Acts, the early Christian movement sometimes called itself the way, and outsiders called them the way. That's before they became called Christians in Antioch. Now, here's the amazing thing at Qumran. In this cave behind me, there are some Aramaic texts too. And one of them is document number 246. All it is just one piece of leather, about that size, 2 columns of text, 9 lines of Aramaic in each column. The same 4 things are described in this text. It appears to be an interpretation of a vision or a dream. He's explaining to the king the meaning of what he saw. And someone is going to come in the midst of wars and violence and nations attacking nations. Somebody's going to come. He'll be called the Son of God, Son of the Most High. He will be great, and he will rule forever. When Mary hears these words, she's hearing something from her world and from her time, and it is directly relevant for understanding this angelic statement, and this is what kicks off what we would regard as the Messianic era.